Let me ask you something. Have you ever become angry over something small, only to discover later that the damage you caused was much greater than the problem itself? Have you ever wished you could return to one moment, take back one sentence, or stop one door from closing? Sometimes, the most painful lesson in life is learning that anger lasts only a few minutes, but its consequences can remain for years. This is the story of a man named Daniel. A man who believed that being loud made him strong. Until one broken watch taught him the true value of time. Daniel was 32 years old and worked as a mechanic in a busy repair shop near the edge of a small city. He was talented with his hands. He could listen to an engine for only a few seconds and immediately know what was wrong. Customers trusted his skill, and his employer often said that Daniel could repair almost anything made of metal. But there was one thing Daniel could not repair: his own temper. Whenever a tool went missing, Daniel shouted. Whenever a customer questioned the price, Daniel became defensive. Whenever another worker made a mistake, he humiliated them in front of everyone. People respected Daniel's ability, but they were afraid of his anger. At home, Daniel lived with his father, Joseph, a quiet 70-year-old man who had raised Daniel alone after his wife passed away. Joseph had spent most of his life repairing clocks and watches. His small workshop stood behind the family home. The walls were covered with old clocks, large wooden clocks, small silver watches, alarm clocks, pocket watches, and tiny music boxes. Every hour, the workshop came alive with different sounds. Ticking, ringing, chiming. Daniel had grown up surrounded by those sounds. As a child, he loved sitting beside his father and watching him work. Joseph would place a watch beneath a magnifying glass and carefully examine every spring, wheel, and screw. Never force a delicate thing, Joseph often told him. Patience can fix what anger will destroy. But as Daniel grew older, he stopped listening. To Daniel, his father seemed too slow, too gentle, too willing to forgive. One evening, Daniel returned home after a difficult day at work. A customer had complained about a repair. Daniel's manager had warned him about shouting at another employee. Then, while driving home, heavy traffic had delayed him for nearly an hour. By the time he entered the house, anger was already burning inside him. Joseph was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of him was an old silver wristwatch. Daniel recognized it immediately. It had belonged to his mother. Joseph had kept it safely in a small wooden box for more than 20 years. "I've been repairing it," Joseph said with a gentle smile. "It stopped working a long time ago. I thought you might like to have it." Daniel barely looked at the watch. "Where is my dinner?" he asked. "I kept it warm for you," Joseph replied, "but the electricity went out for a while, so it may need to be heated again." Daniel opened the pot and touched the food. It was cold. His anger exploded. "I work all day, and you can't even keep one meal warm?" Joseph looked down. "I'm sorry, son. I was working on the watch and didn't notice the power had returned." "The watch?" Daniel turned toward the table. "You cared more about an old watch than my dinner?" "It was your mother's," Joseph said quietly. "I wanted to give it to you on your birthday." But Daniel was no longer listening. He picked up the silver watch. "You waste your whole life fixing useless old things." Then, in one careless movement, he threw it across the room. The watch struck the wall and fell onto the floor. The glass shattered. Several tiny pieces rolled beneath the table. The room became completely silent. Joseph did not shout. He did not argue. He slowly stood up, walked toward the broken watch, and knelt beside it. His hands trembled as he collected the pieces. Daniel noticed tears in his father's eyes, but his pride would not allow him to apologize. "It was already broken," Daniel muttered. Joseph looked at him. For a few seconds, the old man said nothing. Then he whispered, "Some things are broken because they stop working, Daniel." He placed the pieces in his palm. "And some things are broken because someone chooses not to be careful." Joseph carried the watch into his workshop and closed the door. The following morning, Daniel left for work without speaking to his father. He told himself that Joseph was being too emotional. It was only a watch. An old piece of metal. Nothing more. But throughout the day, Daniel kept remembering the sound of the watch hitting the wall. That evening, he returned home late. Joseph's bedroom door was closed. The next morning, it was still closed. Daniel knocked. There was no answer. He opened the door and found his father lying unconscious beside the bed. Joseph had suffered a stroke during the night. Daniel called for an ambulance and followed it to the hospital. For hours, he sat alone in the waiting room, staring at his hands. These were the hands that could repair complicated engines. These were the hands that customers praised. But they were also the hands that had thrown his mother's watch against a wall. Finally, a doctor approached. "Your father is stable," she said, "but the stroke has affected his speech and the movement on the right side of his body. Recovery may take a long time." Daniel entered the hospital room. Joseph was awake, but he looked smaller and weaker than ever before. Daniel sat beside the bed. "Dad," he whispered. Joseph slowly turned his eyes toward him. Daniel wanted to apologize. He wanted to say that he had not meant what he said. He wanted to promise that everything would be different. But the words felt trapped inside him. Joseph tried to speak, but only a faint sound came out. Daniel lowered his head and began to cry. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." Joseph slowly moved his left hand and placed it over Daniel's fingers. That small gesture broke something inside Daniel. For the first time in many years, he did not try to hide his tears. During the weeks that followed, Daniel visited his father every day. He helped him eat. He pushed his wheelchair through the hospital garden. He practiced simple words with him. But Joseph could say very little. One afternoon, Daniel entered his father's old workshop. The clocks were still ticking, but without Joseph, the room felt empty. On the workbench, Daniel found the broken silver watch. The pieces had been carefully arranged on a white cloth. Beside them was a small envelope with Daniel's name. Inside was a letter Joseph had written before the stroke. "My dear Daniel, this watch belonged to your mother. She wore it on the day you were born. When you were a baby, she would hold you in her arms and listen to its ticking while you slept. After she passed away, the watch stopped working. For many years, I could not bring myself to repair it because every time I touched it, I remembered how much I missed her. But recently, I realized that memories are not meant to remain locked inside boxes. They are meant to be passed on. I wanted to repair this watch and give it to you, so that one day, when you felt lost, you could remember that you were deeply loved. Time does not heal everything, Daniel. But time gives us opportunities. Opportunities to apologize. To forgive. To become gentler. Please do not wait too long to become the man I know you can be. Your father." Daniel read the letter 3 times. Then he sat in his father's chair and wept. He looked at the tiny gears scattered across the cloth. For the first time, he understood how much patience was required to repair something delicate. He also understood how quickly one moment of anger could destroy years of love and care. Daniel decided to repair the watch himself. Every evening after visiting the hospital, he sat in the workshop. At first, he failed. The screws were too small. The springs slipped from his fingers. Several times, frustration rose inside him. He wanted to throw the tools down. But then he remembered his father's words. Never force a delicate thing. So Daniel would stop. Close his eyes. Take one slow breath. Then another. And begin again. Days became weeks. At work, Daniel began doing the same thing. When a customer complained, he listened before responding. When an employee made a mistake, he explained instead of shouting. When he felt anger rising, he touched the empty place on his wrist where he hoped to wear his mother's watch. Slowly, people began to notice. One afternoon, a young apprentice accidentally damaged an expensive part. Everyone in the shop became silent. They expected Daniel to explode. The young man's face turned pale. Daniel felt the familiar heat in his chest. His jaw tightened. But then he looked at the frightened apprentice and remembered his father kneeling on the kitchen floor, collecting pieces of broken glass. Daniel took a breath. "Did you do it on purpose?" he asked. The apprentice shook his head. "No, sir." "Then it was a mistake," Daniel said. "Let's find a way to fix it." The entire workshop remained silent. Not because people were afraid. Because they could not believe how much Daniel had changed. Several months later, Joseph finally returned home. He still used a wheelchair and struggled to speak, but his smile had begun to return. Daniel wheeled him into the old workshop. The clocks ticked around them just as they had when Daniel was a child. Daniel placed a small box on the workbench. Joseph opened it slowly. Inside was the silver watch. The glass had been replaced. The case had been polished. The hands were moving again. Tick, tick, tick. Joseph stared at it for a long time. Then he looked at Daniel. "I couldn't make it perfect," Daniel said. "There is still a mark on the back from where it hit the wall." Joseph touched the small dent with his thumb. With great effort, he spoke 3 quiet words. "Leave it there." Daniel looked confused. Joseph pointed to the dent, then to Daniel's heart. "Remember," he whispered. Daniel nodded as tears filled his eyes. He placed the watch around his wrist. From that day forward, he wore it everywhere. Whenever anger came, he listened to its quiet ticking. Each second reminded him that he had a choice. He could react, or he could pause. He could wound, or he could understand. He could destroy something delicate, or he could become patient enough to repair it. Years later, Daniel took over his father's clock shop. Above his workbench, he placed a small wooden sign. It read, "Before you speak in anger, remember that time can move forward, but words can never return." Customers often asked Daniel about the dent in his silver watch. He would smile and say, "That mark is the most valuable part," because it reminded him of the night he nearly lost his father. The night he finally understood that anger is not strength. Anger is only pain demanding to be heard. And true strength is having enough patience to listen before that pain speaks for you. Many of us believe we become angry because other people disappoint us. But often, anger grows from exhaustion, fear, pride, loneliness, or wounds we have never learned to express. This does not excuse the harm we cause, but it shows us where healing must begin. You may not be able to control every emotion that enters your heart, but you can control which emotion receives your voice. You can pause before sending the message. You can walk away before saying the sentence. You can take one breath before making a decision that may change your relationship forever. Remember, a few seconds of silence can save years of regret. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can say in anger is nothing at all. Now let me ask you one final question. Is there someone in your life who deserves a gentler version of you? Perhaps it is your husband, your wife, your child, your parent, or perhaps the person who needs your patience most is yourself. Do not wait for a hospital room, a broken relationship, or an empty chair to tell someone that you are sorry. Time is moving. But while the clock is still ticking, there is still an opportunity to change. There is still an opportunity to forgive. And there is still an opportunity to begin again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may be struggling with anger or regret. And remember, a calm heart is not a heart that never feels anger. It is a heart that has learned not to let anger make its decisions. Thank you for spending these quiet moments with the Calm Way. May you speak gently. May you forgive quickly. And may you never forget that every second gives you another chance to choose peace.